Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Faith as Becoming. Now, with a new layout and new visual theme. If you're just joining us, I would recommend going back to episodes 1, 2, and 3. We're building a logical chain, and each episode depends on what came before. But I'm not the boss of you. You do what I want. You do whatever you want. Now, first, a quick recap of episodes 1 to 3. In episode 1, we talked about the fact that reality is comprehensible and that the best explanation for that is that the universe is grounded in logos. In episode 2, we talked about how potentiality requires actuality, which pretty much means that pure being must exist. And in episode 3, we talked about how pure being is from episode 2 is this same underlying logos from episode 1, that order is fundamental to the universe, that the necessary ground of the universe is rational order itself. We showed that order cannot emerge from disorder, so rational order must be fundamental. Now, today we are going to explore what it means that God exists outside time. What I have, something I've mentioned before, but not really explained. And this isn't just abstract metaphysics. It's understanding this resolves some of the deepest puzzles in theology, such as how can God know the future without destroying free will? What does prayer actually do if God is unchanging? Was there anything before creation? And how can an eternal God respond to temporal events? All of these questions will dissolve once we understand what it actually means that God is outside time. So, what we'll cover today? I will discuss why pure being must be outside of time for the whole concept to work. We'll talk about what eternal present actually means. I will talk about the statement I am, which is the most precise theological statement that can be found within Christianity. I will discuss what implications this have for foreknowledge and freedom, explain why there is no before creation. I will talk about what I think that prayer is actually doing, and I will discuss some common misunderstandings and compare the Hellenic Zeus to the Christian God. Now, to restate this once again, as I do in every episode, I am not claiming certainty here. I'm building a logical chain and discussing what makes sense to me. I might very well be wrong, and that's fine. I'm just talking about how I think about these issues. So I'm trying to be humble here. Anyway, let's begin. Pure being has no potentiality. We discussed this in episode 2. Potentiality means the potential to be something else or become something else. And pure being doesn't have that. Pure being is full actuality. It is fully itself and can't be anything else. Imagining it as anything else makes no sense. It has no potential to be different than it is. It has no potential to change, no potential to not exist. It is fully actualized, completely actual, what philosophers call actus purus. And here is the key point. Change requires potentiality. Imagine, what is change? Change is moving from one state to another state, from potential to actual, or from one actual to another actual via potential. You move from this to that. To change, you must have the potential to be in state A, the potential to be in state B, and the capacity to move from A to B. If you are sitting down and you want to stand up, you have to have both the potential to sit down the potential to stand up, and the capacity to rise. But pure being has no potentiality, and therefore pure being cannot change. And as we established, pure being is the underlying logos of the universe. Pure being is God. Now, here's where it gets interesting. What is time? Time is the measure of change. Past, present, and future. These categories only make sense for things that change. The past is when something was in state A, the present is the transition, and the future is when it will be in state B. Without change, these categories are meaningless, absolutely pointless. I think Einstein said that time exists to make motion look easy, but therefore we come to the concept of something that is outside of time. Pure being cannot change because it has no potentiality. And if time is the measure of change, then pure being must exist outside time, not before time. That is still temporal language, and not during all time. That is still sequential. No, outside of time entirely, in what we call an eternal present. This follows necessarily from what we established in episode 2. So, an eternal present, what does that mean? It's not an infinitely long now. It means that all moments are present to God simultaneously. From God's perspective, there is no past, there is no future, there is no was, or there is no will be. There is only is. Creation, the creation of the universe, your birth, this moment right now when you're listening to this video or this episode, your death, the end of time itself, all of these moments are equally present to God. Not because God is really, really fast at looking back and forth, but because God simply isn't in the sequence at all. He is outside of time. Now, an analogy, imperfect, I know, but it's the best I can do. All analogies when we talk about this are going to be imperfect. Now, imagine you're reading a novel. All of the pages exist simultaneously in your hand. The events on page 1 and page 300 both exist right now in the book. But from the character's perspective, inside of the story, page 1 happens before page 300. They experience sequence. You, outside of the story, can see it all at once. God's relationship to time is somewhat like this, except even this analogy fails, as I said, because you still have to flip through the pages in sequence when you read it. God doesn't flip through. God sees all moments at once. He can see all of the pages at the same time. See, and now I did it. I said at the same time. The concept of time doesn't come into it. But anyway, God sees all moments at once, not because God is looking at all of them very quickly, but because all moments are equally present to God. Now, I know this is hard to grasp, and that is because we exist in time. We can't think outside temporal categories easily. Every verb we use assumes temporal sequence. Was, is, will be, they're all temporal. What we're trying to do here now is to describe something fundamentally outside of our experience using language built for temporal beings. That's tricky, but follow the logic. If God is pure actuality with no potentiality, and change requires potentiality, then God must be outside time. This follows necessarily, even if it's hard to imagine. That brings me to I am who I am from Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. When Moses asks God for his name, God responds, I am who I am, or I am that I am. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh in Hebrew, something like that. I don't know how to pronounce Hebrew, but I think that's how it's pronounced. Tell them I am has sent you. Now, the Old Testament isn't really very fundamental to the way I view theology, but this passage is special because this passage defines what God is. Now, why is this profound? Because this isn't just a mysterious statement, it's the most philosophically precise self-description God could give. I am. Present tense, not I was or I will be, just I am. Pure present, eternal being, being itself. God doesn't say I become or I was and will be. God says I am. This is exactly what we'd expect if God is pure being, outside time, in eternal present. And we have another example from the New Testament. From John chapter 8, verse 58, Jesus makes an extraordinary claim himself. Before Abraham was, I am. Prin Abraham genesthai ego eimi. Notice the verb forms that we're using here. Abraham genesthai, the aorist infinite, to become, came to be. But Jesus, ego eimi, present tense, I am. Abraham exists in becoming. He came to be, he changed, he moved through time. Jesus claims to exist in being, pure present, I am. This is why the Pharisees immediately tried to stone Jesus after this. They knew exactly what he was claiming. He was not making a grammatical error by using present tense instead of past. He was claiming the divine name. He was identifying himself with the I am of Exodus, chapter 3, verse 14. He was claiming to exist outside of time, in pure being, in the eternal present. This was an ontological claim about his nature, not a confused statement about chronology. And this fits perfectly upon the concept of pure being. I am describes it perfectly. There is no past. That would require change from a previous state. There is no future, would require potential for a different state. Only present. Pure actuality, pure being. God doesn't become, God is. This connects perfectly with everything we've established. Pure actuality from episode 2, logos as the ground of all existence from episode 1, and existing outside time, what we're discussing here today. I am captures all of this in 2 words. I am. Now, the implications of this. The classic problem. If God knows the future, how can we have free will? If God knew yesterday that I would choose coffee today, could I choose tea instead? If I can't, then my choice isn't free. And if I can, then God didn't really know the future. It seems like an impossible dilemma, but it isn't. The problem assumes God exists in time. It assumes God knew yesterday what would happen today, but God doesn't exist in time. God doesn't know the future and God doesn't know the past. God knows all moments in eternal present. Your choice of coffee isn't in the future from God's perspective. It is present to God right now along with every other moment, which means that strictly speaking, God doesn't have foreknowledge. Foreknowledge means knowing ahead of time, but God isn't ahead of anything. God doesn't move through time. God has knowledge, period. Not foreknowledge or after knowledge or present knowledge, just knowledge. And that is fundamentally different. All moments are equally present to God, so God knows them all, not because God is predicting the future, but because all moments are present to God. And here's the key here. God's knowledge doesn't cause the choice. When you watch a recorded football game and you know who wins, does your knowledge cause them to win? No, they don't. It doesn't. They choose their actions freely. You just happen to know the outcome because you're seeing it after the fact. Also, not a perfect analogy because God isn't seeing it after the fact. God is seeing it in an eternal present. God knows your choice, not because God determined it, but because from God's perspective, you're making it right now. God knows because you freely choose, not the other way around. Think about an author and a character in the novel. The author knows everything the character will do in the story. The author sees the whole story at once. Certain authors, different authors write in different ways, but within the story, the character's choices can still be portrayed as free and meaningful. The author knows because the author created the whole narrative, but the character still chooses within the logic of the story. Now, this analogy fails in important ways. We are not just characters in God's novel. We're real beings making real choices. An author chooses for the characters. We don't. God doesn't. But it shows how knowledge and freedom can coexist when one party is outside the temporal sequence. That's my point. So don't take the analogy too literal. So so God knows your choices from an eternal present, and your choices are genuinely free within time. They aren't contradictory, they are compatible once you understand that God isn't in the temporal sequence predicting what you'll do. God simply knows because all moments are present to God. Your choice happens in time. God's knowledge is outside time. No contradiction and no conflict. You still have free will, even with an omniscient God. This moves us on to the before. Time is a feature of creation. There is no time before creation. People ask what was God doing before he created the universe, and St. Augustine famously joked he was creating hell for people who ask those questions. But the question is malformed. That's the simple answer. Time is part of creation. Before is a temporal category that makes no sense. It's a feature of creation. It's a part of the created order. Before creation, there is no before. Before is a temporal category, and time didn't exist yet. From God's perspective, from outside time, creation doesn't happen after a period of creating. It simply is. The entire timeline of creation, from Big Bang to heat death or whatever happens at the death of the end universe, is eternally present to God. God didn't exist in some kind of temporal state, waiting, and then at some point decide, okay, now I'll create. That would mean God changes from not creating to creating and exists in time with a before and after. But God doesn't change and isn't in time. From God's perspective, creation isn't an event in God's timeline. It's the act by which time itself comes into being. Creation is God's eternal act. Not eternal in the sense of lasting a really long time, eternal in the sense of outside time entirely. God's creative act doesn't happen at a point in time, it's the act that grounds all time. Again, this is hard to wrap your mind around because we're temporal creatures, but once again, follow the logic. If God is outside time, then God's actions are outside time too. Here I might run into some problems with many other Christians. I'm going to talk about prayer. And what does prayer do? If God is unchanging, what does it do? The common assumption is that prayer changes God's mind. We commune with God in order for God to see us, to listen to us. That assumes God changes. And he doesn't. So what's going on? From God's perspective, there isn't a before or after prayer. How could it be? All prayers are eternally present to God because he's outside time. all prayers are eternally present. God doesn't think, I'll change my plans now. That would require change. Once again, God would move from one state, not planning to act, to another state, planning to act. And God doesn't move through stages, he just is. What prayer does is that prayer changes us, not God. It aligns our will with God's will, possibly. It opens us up to divine action. It transforms our understanding, our desires, our perspective. It moves us closer to God, possibly. When we pray and things change, it's not that God changed plans, it's that we became capable of receiving what God was always offering. Prayer is a relationship with God, not a vending machine for requests. It's not transactional. A transactional view of prayer is borderline paganism. Instead, it is communion with pure being. Remember what I talked about before from episode 3. God acts through natural law. God doesn't operate despite or against it. He operates through natural law because natural law is the expression of divine nature. Why build a chair and then sit on the floor? Prayer doesn't get God to violate the order he himself established. Prayer works within that order, often by changing us so that we align with it. And we'll explore this much more in later episodes. But for now, prayer is real and meaningful, but not because it changes God's mind. It's because it changes us. Now, once again, as I talked about in episode 3, I think, and the God we're describing is not Zeus or Jupiter or Odin or anything like that. Zeus or all of these pagan gods exist in time. They change, they have moods, desires, potentiality, reacts to events. Zeus is a being in becoming, but very powerful. The God we're describing is categorically different. Not a super powerful being who exists somewhere doing things, but being itself, the ground of existence, the reason there is something rather than nothing. God doesn't have power over things. God is the source of the possibility of things having power. This is why questions like, can God make a rock so heavy he can't lift it, are nonsensical, just word salad. They treat God like Zeus, a very strong being subject to logical puzzles about strength. That question doesn't mean anything. Similarly, God isn't somewhere. Space, like time, is a part of creation. God isn't located in space. God is above the universe or outside it in the spatial sense. God is the ground of space itself. Every point in space is equally close to God, which is another way of saying spatial categories don't apply to God. Similarly, God can't be surprised by events. God can't learn new information. God can't change his mind based on new developments. This isn't because God is stubborn or that God is incapable of learning, which sure he is, but because all developments are already present to God. It is ontologically impossible. There is no new information from God's perspective. Everything is eternally present. Then you might ask, if God sees all time at once, does God really care about individual moments and individual people? Yes, absolutely yes. Seeing all moments doesn't mean God doesn't care about each one person and each one moment. God knowing your entire life doesn't mean God doesn't love you in each moment. In fact, God knows you more completely than you know yourself. He has to, with this God that we've been describing. He knows not just your present state, but your entire existence, from beginning to end, all held in divine love simultaneously. God is both personal and timeless. There's nothing contradictory about that. God is personal because he knows you, loves you, and relates to you. God is timeless because he doesn't change and doesn't move through temporal sequence. Both are true. God's love for you isn't something God decided in time, it's eternal. It's part of God's very nature as God creates you. And I will talk more about this in the next episode. Now then, a summary what this means for theology. Understanding that God is outside time resolves multiple theological puzzles. We started with talking about the foreknowledge problem, foreknowledge and freedom. Compatible. All moments are present, but the choices are still free. We make our choices within time, and God knows all of our choices because he exists outside of time. What was before creation? There is no before creation. Time begins with creation, and God's creative act is eternal. Prayer doesn't change God's mind, and divine unchangeability. God doesn't change. But this also sets up something crucial for later episodes. If God is outside time, how can God enter time in the incarnation? How can the eternal God become temporal in Jesus Christ? We'll address this fully in episode 11, which is a way off, I know, but the foundation is here. The incarnation isn't God changing. It's God taking on human nature, which exists in time, while still remaining divine, which exists outside time. This is the hypostatic union. Christ is fully God and fully human at the same time, commingled but distinct. The union of timeless being with temporal becoming. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Now, there is one more implication. Creation isn't just God starting things and stepping back. God's creative act sustains all of existence at every moment. If God stopped creating, though that language is imperfect since he exists outside of time, nothing would exist. Not because God is actively maintaining things through effort, but because existence itself is grounded in God's eternal creative act. And remember, eternal not as in very long time, but eternal as in outside of time. Every moment of existence is held in being by pure being. Now, some objections. These are the objections I'm going to be talking about here. That makes God impersonal and distant. If God doesn't change, how can God love? Too abstract and doesn't match the Bible. And how can you be certain? The last one is important. Now, the objection one, the response that it makes God distant. This was actually a criticism that was raised by many late pagans within the Roman Empire when Christianity was becoming the dominant religion in the Roman Empire and paganism was disappearing. Many pagans said that Christianity removes the divine from the world. Before they had gods within the world, in streams and in forests and nymphs and things like that. And Christianity removed all of these and removed the divine from the mortal. But I would actually claim, because of the transcendental God being outside of time, and I would argue that it does the opposite. God being outside time makes God more intimately present. He's present to every moment. He's not far away in the past or future. He's present in every moment, and he's not far away in some other location either. He is here, and he is everywhere all at once, while simultaneously not being here at all. He knows your entire life, every thought, every choice that you ever have made or is going to make, because he sees all of you completely at all times. That's not distant. That's complete, total, and intimate presence. That's something different entirely. So a transcendental God is paradoxically more present than a God that lives on Mount Olympus within the world. And the grandmother praying to her rosary with simple trust experienced this intimacy directly without understanding the metaphysics. Now, then, if God doesn't change, how can God love? Love involves response. Well, It's a deep question that we'll address more fully in future episodes when we discuss God must be love. This is episode 6 here, but I think it's actually episode 5, whatever. But briefly, God's love isn't a response to our actions. God's love is eternal, unchanging, and complete. What changes is our capacity to receive that love, our openness to it, and our alignment with it. But from our perspective, it feels like God responds. And in a real sense, God does relate to us personally, but from God's response, that love is eternally present, not developing or changing. Now, so love doesn't require response, but it does require relation. And I'll talk about this, explore how in later episodes. It's both eternal and personal, but we'll get there. Now then, this is too abstract. It doesn't match how the Bible describes God. That's true. The Bible uses anthropomorphic language, describing God in human terms, because we're human and we need accessible language to grapple with these ideas. God regrets, God changes his mind, God gets angry. This is accommodated language for creatures who exist in time. But it's describing God through a narrative that we can relate to. It's not untrue, but it serves a specific purpose. Scripture also gives us I am, pure present, pure being. The anthropomorphic language helps us relate to God, whereas the ontological claims tells us what God actually is. Like I said, both can be true because they serve different purposes. Now then, objection 4. How can you be so certain about this? I'm not. I'm not certain. I'm following where this reason leads, and this makes the most sense to me. If pure being exists, as we established in episode 2, and if pure being has no potentiality, then pure being must be outside time. This follows logically. Could I be wrong about the foundational premises? Of course. Of course I could. But if you accept that pure being exists and has no potentiality, then I would say that this conclusion follows necessarily. I'm not claiming revelation or mystical certainty. I'm claiming some form of logical coherence at the very least. That's all I'm claiming. That and adding that I feel that this is true. And that is not a scientific answer, but I'm not doing science. I'm doing theology. And that is something different. Now then, what we've established. We have established that pure being has no potentiality, and that change requires potentiality, which means that pure being cannot change. We have established that time measures change, and what follows then is that pure being is outside of time, and that the phrase I am from the Bible captures this perfectly. Foreknowledge, creation, and prayer, we have resolved those issues. So, the foundation deepens. In episode 1, reality was grounded in logos. Pure being, necessary ground of all existence, was established in episode 2, and in episode 3 we combined these two. Pure being is the underlying logos. And now we have established that pure being is outside of time. Now, in the next episode, we will discuss why God wanted us specifically. Did he want us, or did he just want intelligent life in general? This matters enormously, because if God wanted us specifically, this exact configuration of reality, these exact people, that tells us something profound about divine intent. And we'll see how the epistemic structure of reality, the fact that we can discover truth but can't know with certainty, reveals what God actually wants from us. So God's knowledge of you is complete. He can see your entire life in eternal present. And God's love is eternal and unchanging and not conditional. This means that your choices are free and your existence is sustained by pure being at every moment. And this is the ground of your relationship with God, not just abstract philosophy. This is fundamental. So the chain. I'm not going to read all of this out loud, but we have reached episode 4 with God outside time. And next time we'll talk about that God wanted us specifically. In episode 6, we'll talk about how God must be love. Then in 7, we'll talk about why the Trinity, the Trinitarian model of divinity in Christianity, is necessary for this. In episode 8, we'll discuss how humans are constitutively relational and how that relates to the structure, the nature of God himself. In episode 9, I will talk more about being and becoming, those two terms that I've been using throughout the series. In episode 10, I will talk about why the fall of Adam and Eve, the Adam and Eve story, was necessary. In 11, I will talk about why the incarnation of Jesus Christ is necessary. Then in 12, I will talk about a bit why I don't think that other solutions to these questions work as well. And then in episode 13, the end of the season, I will talk about kenosis and what that means. Now, your homework. Think about time, your experience of it. You remember the past, you experience the present, and you anticipate the future. God doesn't do this. He doesn't experience sequence. All moments are present to him. What would it mean for someone to know your entire life? Past, present, future, all at once. What would it mean to be loved by someone who sees you completely, not just as you are now, but as you were, as you are, as you will be? It's interesting to think about. Now, the like and subscribe part. Please leave a comment if this clicked with you, if some questions turned up in your head or something like that. If you have objections, I want to hear them too. If you have better ways to understand divine eternity, please share it. Like I say in every episode, I want this to be a conversation. So, thank you for thinking this through with me. In episode 5, we'll talk about why God wanted us specifically and what the structure of reality tells us about divine intent. If you've stuck around for this long, thank you, and I hope to see you next time. See you then. Bye.